Okay, we're going to get started. Good morning and welcome to this California Department of Fish and Wildlife training brought to you by the Caltrans Division of Local Assistance. My name is Scott Jakovich. I'm with the California Local Technical Assistance Center. We partner with Caltrans DLA to bring you unique training opportunities like this one. And I encourage you to check out more of what's happening at CalTAP at our website, caltap.org. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone should have access to both chat and Q&A boxes. Please jump in and introduce yourself via chat if you haven't already. We ask that you save the Q&A box to specifically ask questions of our presenters. When you're doing so, the more detail, the better, but be prepared. There's an opportunity for a presenter to reach out and ask you to turn your mic on and talk to you directly. We might do that too. And of course, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post that later this week at our California LTAP YouTube Center. With that out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to our host this morning, Danielle Elledge, Resource Agency Coordinator at Caltrans DLA. Danielle, it's all yours.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Hello, my name is Danielle Elledge, and I am a Resource Agency Coordinator for the Division of Local Assistance, Office of Environmental Compliance and Outreach at headquarters. We also refer to our office as the ECO office, and I'm here to provide a brief overview of the Caltrans Division of Local Assistance and CDFW partnership, which is why we're all here today. And also, we'll be introducing the speakers and monitoring the Q&A as well. All right. Pardon me, sorry about that. Having a little bit of... I'm having a little issue. There we go. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Okay, so as I mentioned, the Office of Environmental Compliance and Outreach initiated a partnership with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which I'll refer to as the partnership moving forward. We did this to foster information sharing between headquarters, Division of Local Assistance, and CDFW directly. As many of you know, when you're a local public agency and you use federal funds, you are the lead CEQA agency. So there's little involvement from Caltrans to CDFW. So an intention for us to create this partnership is to provide some access and also information sharing, training opportunities, and process improvements. So in March 2023, the partnership began. We started monthly meetings to strategize and execute plans for training opportunities between these two departments. And in August 2023, we had our first joint training between Caltrans and CDFW. And this effort included a module that informs some CDFW staff about local assistance projects, where we're getting your projects on CDFW's radar. And then also sharing just CDFW's perspectives about various issues that they're interested in as well. And so today is our first training that's specifically provided and geared to local public agencies and your partners. We also have Caltrans staff in today, so we really just want to make sure it's important for you to know that if you are a Caltrans staff, you don't have any authority over state permits. And so we're facilitating this training in order to offer these opportunities to you all to engage and learn from CDFW. If you are working on capital projects, please remember that this is informational only for you to understand the process that local public agencies and their partners must navigate. And if you're working on those capital projects, be sure to check with your subject matter experts at the Division of Environmental Analysis for guidance on any of the topics discussed today. So with that said, we are happy to move forward and announce our speakers today. So we have Madeline Wheeland from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I believe Laurel Lowe is first up. So if you are ready, go ahead and share your screen. Welcome.
All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here today, everyone. Monday morning, bright and early. My name is Laurel Lowe, and I'm a senior environmental scientist specialist with CDFW. I work in the landscape conservation planning program and focusing on these wildlife connectivity advanced mitigation. So there's some new code that came out in 2022. And I've been working with a team in CDFW to try to get new guidelines out for those, as well as into the future work on implementation of those guidelines. So I wanted to share with you today a little bit about what that's all about. The guidelines actually just came out last week for public comment. So if you're interested, we'd love to get some feedback from you all, and I'll share a little bit more information about how to get involved in the public comment at the end of this presentation. This is new stuff, and we haven't completely figured it out. Like I said, the code just came out a little bit ago, and we're working through the details. So at the end of the day, we're trying to make guidelines that are ecologically meaningful and also implementable, so we can actually get some of these wildlife connectivity actions or projects on the ground. So it's really going to take a lot of different perspectives to come together to make these guidelines successful. So I'll dive into the code a little bit and kind of the structure for these new guidelines, and then I'll go into the detail of the guidelines themselves. So first off, we had Senate Bill 790, which became code in January of 2022, and that became Fish and Game Code Section 1955 through 1958. This gave us, CDFW, the ability to approve compensatory mitigation credits for wildlife connectivity actions through our conservation and mitigation banking program, as well as the regional conservation investment strategies, or RCIS. And the subset of that is the MCA program, or the mitigation credit agreements. And so these are two tools for advanced mitigation, and these wildlife connectivity advanced mitigation guidelines will be supplemental to both of those program guidelines. So a little bit general about advanced mitigation. The idea behind that is that a sponsor for a bank or an MCA project will protect and manage land for its natural resource values, and then in exchange for that, they can get some compensatory mitigation credits that they can sell to others needing that mitigation, like a permittee. And then the idea is hopefully that they can earn a return on that investment of protecting the land originally by selling those credits. Diving into the banking program. The banking program is a well-established program, and it's working with multiple agencies to create procedures and processes that are all in alignment. There is an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, where multiple agencies, federal and state agencies, are working together on this. And this allows multiple credit types for these different regulatory agencies to all be together in one bank under one process. Then MCAs, the mitigation credit agreements, they, oh, here, let's see my first slide. Let me go back and try again. Can you see my second slide now on the code?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. So the MCAs will be our newer program. Those guidelines actually just came out this summer. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and take a look at our website. You can find them there. MCAs are similar to banks in terms that they are another source of advanced mitigation, but there are some differences. MCAs can be approved in an RCIS area. They have to be within that area, whereas banks, there's more flexibility throughout the state. MCAs can also approve both permanent and non-permanent credits, while banks only create permanent credits. So those are a couple examples of some of the differences, but they're just different tools, and depending on what suits your needs as a potential sponsor, you can determine which is best for you. So thinking about generally what is the importance, what's the why for this new code and these new guidelines. So I wanted to highlight some key features that make these guidelines important in the connectivity world, the mitigation world, why these are important. So one is that banks have a typical land protection mechanism as a conservation easement. And that's kind of a very high form of protection. However, this code gives us a little bit more flexibility. So it says if a conservation easement is not feasible, thinking about maybe in that right of way, this will allow us, CDFW, to provide permanent credits for areas with long-term durability. And so before, that was a hurdle for getting banks with these wildlife connectivity actions included for implementation. So this flexibility is huge for getting more connectivity projects on the ground. Next, we have a way to evaluate these wildlife connectivity actions. So we can look, instead of just the acreage, we can look at the ecological benefit that it's providing. So typically in banks, we'll use the acreage to determine the number of credits, but here we're saying we'll look at the ecological benefit and provide more credits than just the acreage of that wildlife connectivity action. And then finally, this provides economic incentives for wildlife crossings. So we can get those compensatory mitigation credits for projects. And this is an opportunity for green investment, getting more projects on the ground for connectivity. So I've talked a little bit about these wildlife connectivity actions, but what do those actually mean? The code defines it, and kind of in a quick summary, it's an action that improves habitat connectivity. So you can think of both aquatic projects, maybe fish passage projects, also terrestrial projects here. And then there can be lots of ideas in terms of how this applies. So you can think about wildlife migration, recolonization, breeding opportunities, things that have been prevented by built infrastructure such as roads or even habitat fragmentation. The code goes into an example for this wildlife connectivity action as a road overpass or underpass solely for wildlife use. So when we wrote these guidelines, we were thinking of just that, addressing built infrastructure like roads. So thinking about overpasses and underpasses as those wildlife connectivity actions. So you have that crossing and it creates credits. How can those credits be applied? So the CDFW can approve credits for that wildlife connectivity action similar to a bank. So credits can fulfill either CEQA, CISA, or all right, back. CDFW can approve credits for that wildlife connectivity action. Like banking, those credits can fulfill CEQA, CISA, or LSA mitigation requirements. But there's also some flexibility in the code that it says it could fulfill compensatory mitigation requirements under any state or federal environmental law, of course, as determined applicable by those other agencies. So this is our CDFW code, but there's some flexibility if other agencies want to participate or be included, have some collaboration here. We have that flexibility based on our code. And then once we have those credits, they can satisfy both connectivity and non-connectivity related mitigation requirements, of course, based on the approval of CDFW on a case-by-case basis. So the idea is that these credits will meet the robust standards for each of these CEQA, CISA, LSA mitigation requirements, and that they can be used just like banking credits. So some considerations for evaluating how many credits you should get for that wildlife connectivity action. I wanted to just think about the big picture first, that wildlife connectivity actions provide a much greater ecological benefit than just the small strip of land that it occupies. So thinking about that overpass or underpass, it's relatively small, but it has a huge ecological benefit. And so we won't just be looking at acreage, we'll be having to consider other factors to determine how much of an ecological value this is actually providing. So we have here the 5 ecological benefit crediting considerations. First is the ecological engineered design. How has the structure itself been designed to facilitate crossing by those target species? The value of the habitat connected, what's on each side of that crossing, the value of the particular location. Why did you choose that location and not maybe something a little bit up or down the road? Critical linkages, looking at the importance of connectivity in that area. And then finally, population level benefits to species. So thinking about what is specific needs by that species, by even that population in terms of connectivity. So there will be a scoring process going through all 5 of these for each credit type, and we'll divide it in between species type and also habitat type. So some of these will not apply to habitat. For example, like this population level benefits to species. So there'll be a little bit of a split there, and that will be clarified in the guidelines what factors are needed to consider for species versus habitat credits. So I talked about kind of the code and the scoping big picture behind all of this, and now I wanted to shift gears and focus on those guidelines themselves, getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty and the principles. So I'll talk a little bit quickly about each of these sections, and then the next couple of slides I'll dive into the section highlighted here, the ecological benefit crediting considerations, to dive into some of the fun stuff. So first, we have the overview, that's general information, background, purpose, a little bit about the legislation. Then we have section 2, which is the banking and MCA process with a wildlife connectivity action. So as I mentioned in the beginning, these guidelines are supplemental to either the bank or MCA guidelines. And we want to make it really clear what that interface is, how that'll work, and how those processes will be clear for that potential sponsor of a bank or MCA. So we provide some information of like what else is needed, because now you have this wildlife connectivity action, and when is that information needed throughout the processes. Section 3 is the wildlife connectivity action crediting section. That goes in how to determine crediting and a process behind that. Section 4 is the ecological benefit crediting considerations. So that dives into what are we actually looking at to determine the amount of credits. And really section 3 and 4 go hand in hand, looking at those together to determine credit amounts. Section 5 is real estate instruments, maintenance, and monitoring. That's looking into kind of how do we protect these things in perpetuity, having a conservation easement or a long-term durability agreement, and funding for these projects. And then we have section 6, which is bank and MCA modifications. That's trying to look at, we have some templates or documents that we'll normally use for the bank or MCA process. How are those being changed now? What are some differences? Because we have to think a little differently in terms of having those structures, and then also with the thought of connectivity for ecological benefit there. And then finally, we have the appendices that has some resources in terms of connectivity resources you can use for a sponsor maybe providing information to us, and then also some templates and checklists, again, for that sponsor to have a smooth process in terms of how to propose a project. As I noted, these guidelines are available for public comment now, so we'd love to hear from you all if you have some time and would like to dive in. We'd appreciate it. And I'll put the link in the chat at the end. So here I wanted to dive into the ecological benefit crediting considerations here. What are we actually looking at to determine these credits at the end of the day? So we have those 5 big sections that I talked about earlier, and then each of them are divided into subcategories, and there will be points associated with each of these. So I just wanted to highlight kind of the idea behind these and what we're looking at. So first we have that ecological engineering design, how well the design suits the needs of that target species to facilitate crossing and actual use of that structure. So within that, we have looking at the structure dimensions, factors like the openness ratio, line of sight, width or length. Then we have the sound and light minimization measures. So oftentimes species might be wary of human-made sound and light. And so what has been incorporated into the design to limit those sound and light features, thinking about earth berms or maybe dense vegetation to limit the sound and light. Then we have surface substrates and vegetation. So hopefully there's natural substrates used that are mimicking the natural habitat, so there can be continuity for those species moving through. Then we have the hydrogeomorphic components. So the water, trying to have the water course to as close to the natural state as possible as it's moving through the wildlife connectivity action. Next, we have existing conditions. So there's on-site constraints. And so thinking about how the design has incorporated those into still having a functioning structure. Looking at the approaches, trying to mimic the surrounding landscape, thinking about the slope, the substrate to actually get those species to move through. Fencing, so we can have fencing to help kind of funnel or direct those species to move to that wildlife connectivity action. And then thinking specifically about the needs of the species in the area when adding that in. What is the mesh sizing that they need, the height if they're jumping species. Also thinking about if it needs to be buried or flushed to the ground if there's species that might be diggers. Then we have designing for resilience to climate change. So thinking about really durability in the long term with climate change. We know this is coming, so thinking about what plant assemblages we might need, rainfall changes, sea level rise, how to make this structure ready for the long future with climate change. And then we have additional species specific elements. So this is anything that might be unique to that target species, perhaps thinking about energy expenditures or the needs of different life stages for that species and how the design has taken that into consideration. And then the next big section is the value of the habitat connected. So again, what is being connected on each side, thinking about both the quality of that habitat, the quantity of that habitat, and also the protection of that habitat. Is there a conservation easement there? Is it private land? Is it recreation like parks? So thinking about that is really important because you can create this beautiful structure, land on both sides, and then we don't want that connection to go into a development, just a couple of years later. So continuing on the big 5, the next one is the value of that particular location. So the potential of species to come that location, the likelihood of them using the crossing. So the subcategories under that starts off with topography, thinking about the slope or perhaps topographic barriers. Then we have the water course or other natural pathway. So that can be looking at the aquatic resources present and the ability of that resource to suit the needs of that particular species. Then we have vegetative and other cover. So this is making sure that those species feel comfortable coming and approaching that area to begin with. Do they feel on edge? Do they like open space? Do they like, rocks to hide behind? What are the needs of that species? Then we have movement and mortality data. So that's looking at detections of species in the area and potentially attempted crossings. Then we have permeability and built infrastructure characteristics. So what is the situation right now? What is the amount of that barrier, looking at things like the traffic, speed of that traffic, the number of lanes. Next is other wildlife connectivity actions. What other wildlife connectivity actions might be in the area? Are they for the same species, different species? Then we have human impacts. So of course, humans can deter wildlife. And so what measures are incorporated to ensure that these crossings are for wildlife only? The next big section is critical linkages. So the importance of connectivity in that general area, and that's split up in between the regional connectivity, which is looking at analyses that have been done statewide. So that can be data or analyses that have already been done that you can reference. So one example is ACE, our areas of conservation emphasis. They have a layer specifically for terrestrial connectivity. That's a CDFW data source. And then another option is to look more specifically at the local connectivity. So that's a little bit more specific, looking at something like the barriers report that identifies specific barriers across the state. Again, another CDFW resource there. Then finally, we have population level benefits to the target species. So the specific needs of that species and what they might need in terms of movement. So we can be looking at genetic diversity and breeding opportunities, as well as their ability to adapt to climate change. Maybe that particular population needs to go to different elevations or latitudes to adjust. And so how can this crossing help them with that? So I know I just shared a lot with you. These are a lot of new ideas. And I want to highlight here that this is really a frame shift, a paradigm shift. And we're challenging ourselves to think differently in terms of what might be standard in the world of advanced mitigation with banking, as well as connectivity. And so kind of as we're going through these guidelines, I wanted to highlight some key features here that are different, and we're can now have new assumptions or new givens because of this code, and trying to figure out, well, how do we make them work? So the first one is that credit allocations can go beyond the actual credits conserved. So that's where we're looking at the ecological benefit crediting considerations that I just went through, and that the credits that are created can be used to mitigate credits related to connectivity or non-connectivity related projects. Next, we have that long-term durability agreement. So where a conservation easement is infeasible, we can have a long-term durability agreement. So this will really be in areas like the right-of-way where we can't have a conservation easement and we need some flexibility. The idea of this long-term durability agreement is that it'll have a lot of the ecological protections like a conservation easement, but still provide that flexibility that we do need in that right-of-way. And so that's something we are still working on, figuring out what that'll actually look like. And of course, that might have differences in terms of a project by project, who the different partners are in that project and the specifics of that project. But that's something we will be diving into and working with folks on. And then next we have how other agencies might interface. So as I mentioned before, the code says that there can be other state or federal environmental laws that this applies to. but we're still working out what that might look like, working with those other agencies, what opportunities are there for collaboration and synergies. And so we're just kind of been figuring out what works for us. And then our next step will be working with those other agencies to see how we can create that interface. And then finally, a big idea is that banks and MCAs can now include roads with a wildlife connectivity action, for example. So before, we might have seen a proposal for a bank that was bisected by a road, and we would think that's not very good habitat, that's fragmented. But now if we see that same bank and it has that little wildlife connectivity action adjoining those two sides with that road, we could say, hey, that's actually a really good project because we can have land protected on both sides. So as we're going through this process, now thinking about not just the land, but the ability of those animals to move across the barrier, how does this change our typical process now that we're thinking about the land, but also the structure and connectivity? So I wanted to note a little bit about our public comment. Usually we'll have a 60-day public comment, but the holidays are coming up. So this will be a 90-day public comment. We'd love to hear from you all, get some feedback about how this could work for you all, or if you have thoughts about how to make this better. Like I said, this is new, and there's going to be a lot of different perspectives that are needed to make this work and make sense. So if you want to provide information, you can, or a comment, please provide a letter by Tuesday, January 16th at the end of the day, 5 p.m. And then we have our new email address specifically for this team working on the Wildlife Connectivity Advanced Mitigation Guidelines. So that is called mitconnect@wildlife.ca.gov. So please submit your comment letter there. And then when you're writing your comment, please provide the page, section, and paragraph number. We'll have multiple letters probably, and trying to make sure we're looking at the right section. And then, as you're making those edits, things start moving around a little bit. So having all of that information will be really helpful to make sure we're talking about the same sections. And then in terms of ideal comments, please identify any red flags or key issues that you might have. Again, thinking about what I was talking about in the previous slide, it's a paradigm shift. We have to think about things a little bit differently. So if there are some red flags, trying to think about, well, how can we make this work where can be some opportunities there. Also identifying any text or concepts that are unclear so we can work with that wording a little bit more. And then when you do provide edits, please provide a clear what and that why, or that rationale for the changes. Sometimes many people will note something unclear about a section, and so just understanding all of your rationale behind it can make sure we have a really good edit at the end, incorporating these different perspectives. And then big picture of this, I want to highlight, we want to make this easy for you all if you choose to provide some comments. So if you have questions, or you think providing some comments might be easier via a conversation, please let us know. We can set up a meeting. You can email us any questions at that MitConnect email. Sometimes it's easier just to chat and say, hey, I'm confused about this one little thing, and that will help you provide more comments down the line that are more specific. Or sometimes too, maybe just having a conversation versus spending the time writing a formal letter can be easier. So let us know if you have thoughts or comments via that email address. And then once the public comment period is over, we are not required to respond to comments based on what's in our code, but we really do look forward to seeing what folks have to say. And these comments will make these guidelines better and more robust. So we're happy if you have thoughts. So I'll just end here. This is our contact information, the email, and then our website, and I'll copy that and put it in the chat. On the website, you can find the guidelines if you want to provide some comment. And then the first three folks listed here is our staff working in our headquarters working on these guidelines. And then the last two, Suzanne and Karen, is our management. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions if you all have any.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. So we do have a couple questions. It looks like we just got another question in the chat. We have a question I'm just going to answer really quick. Basically, someone's asking about the presentations, if we're going to share them. And so we have already shared them with the group. So if you haven't received it already, in the chat, there is an email, admin@caltap.org. Email them, you can get a copy. And then we have our first question for you, Laurel. Does CDFW have its own connectivity actions that local agencies can help fund in return for compensatory mitigation credits?
No,
and
so
let me know if you want me to read that again.
Sure. No, that was good. So we don't have projects specifically. We do have some of these resources that I was talking about, that's talking more generally about barriers or areas that are important to connectivity, but not specific projects. So the idea is that a sponsor would kind of do that work and propose a project to us, and then we can review and go through kind of deeper conversations about that. There is a relatively new code that just came out, which is AB 2344, and that will be looking at more of identifying barriers and prioritizing them, and maybe eventually moving towards implementation. And that code, I think, is in what's under Caltrans, but then we'll have staff as well at CDFW working with them. So that's more of maybe what the question was thinking about, which is that AB 2344 code.
Okay, and another question here. Does this just apply to CISA species connectivity, or could we potentially get credit for providing passage for non-CISA species? For example, if we incorporate amphibian tunnels for all species, would we be able to use that for credits?
Yeah, so definitely CISA credits are an option for species, but you could also potentially have CEQA species credits in there as well. So thinking about what species would benefit from that project, and then what credits you could get on the other side of that. So I think that's kind of a little bit of the brain shift switch here, is thinking not just about helpful projects overall, but what projects will get you mitigation credits that can then be sold. So of course, if it's greater ecological benefits overall, that's awesome. But what's going to get you credits is going to be specifically to CEQA, CISA, LSA, and maybe those other federal or state agency requirements.
Okay. So I just want to clarify, did you say federal species as well potentially can?
Potentially. So we're still working with our other agencies to see what that might look like. The code says it can apply to other state or federal regulatory requirements, but we'll have to see maybe like what the service thinks. Maybe it'd be great to have duly listed species credit types. But again, it's going to depend on those other agencies, what their requirements are for their code, and see where we can have some synergies there.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for Laurel? We still have a couple more minutes for Q&A.
Hi, this is Andrew Bain. I'm coming off of mute.
Oh. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, I'm curious where this fits into the planning process. So if I'm a project proponent and I'm going to have some impacts, and then I'm going to propose to, let's say, a conservation agency to fund a wildlife crossing, a dedicated wildlife crossing, to what level of design will we need to have that completed in order to have the crossing assessed by CDFW to determine what value of advanced mitigation credit we're going to be able to achieve?
So in our guidelines, we go into that. For banking, for example, there's multiple levels of review. There's the draft prospectus, which is an optional option for review. Then there's the prospectus, and then the bank enabling or the bank package. So there's different phases of review, and along those, there's different requirements for what information is there. So for example, earlier on, maybe just conceptual designs are needed, and then we'll go into detail about the specifics of what we would need for those, thinking about the engineering aspect for that. And then later on, we'll need more and more detail in terms of the 30%, 60%, 90% completed engineering designs for those. But this is also something that this is new. And so figuring out exactly what we need when, and understanding too that those can be really expensive for folks. So making sure we have what we need to do that ecological justification, but realizing not to go too far where it's a lot of money for you all to get those drawings.
Thanks for the answer.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, which I'll go ahead and read. As we know, determining locations for habitat connectivity rely heavily on research and available data. Has funding CDFW research projects specifically designed for habitat connectivity been considered for mitigation credits? So it sounds like I think they're saying, oh, would you guys fund? Is that, I can try to understand that better, but is that?
So for this, it's specifically focused on those advanced mitigation structures, getting those like overpasses and underpasses out in terms of these guidelines. There are other opportunities not related to this. There's some grant money that just came out for structures. And so there might be other opportunities to get some research. I know, finding out, well, what type of project works best for different species type, and a lot of variabilities can be out there, and we're still working on getting that information. So if you're interested in that, you can look into some grant funding that might be available. But realizing that this wildlife connectivity advanced mitigation guidelines is pretty like niche within the broader world of connectivity. And so it's just one tool in terms of getting all of that information or projects on the ground for more connectivity across the state.
Okay, and we have one more. Can a connectivity solution for one CISA species be used when it doesn't necessarily benefit another CISA species in the area without requiring additional mitigation for the species that it doesn't benefit?
So that would probably be most related to like the overarching program, the banking or MCA program. But typically with those, if there are, two species in the area that are listed and need protection, but you're focusing on just one, there would still need to be mitigation for that other species that might be impacted. So there will need to be some other credits. So either permanently responsible project or buying credits for another bank that might be in the area.
Okay. I think that is it so far. Last call for questions for Laurel, then we'll move on. All right. Okay. Thank you
Well,
so
those were
much.
great questions. Thanks so much, everyone.
And Jonathan popped up with one more.
Oh, they're in the, okay. Sorry, I didn't see it in the chat. Pardon. Sorry, just kidding, Laurel.
No worries.
I think I got that one.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. No, we got that one. That's the funding for research projects. Okay, so it looks like we are moving on to Madeline and consistency determinations.
Hi there, Danielle. I'm having
Take your time.
difficulty sharing my screen. I had to leave and come back, so I think that might be the issue. Let's see.
I might.
Yeah, Scott, can you make me a co-host again? There we go. Now I can share my screen. All right. Excellent. All right. Can we see my my PowerPoint?
Yeah, looks good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Madeline Wieland. I'm a senior environmental scientist in CDFW in the Habitat Conservation Planning Branch in our environmental review and permitting program. I specialize on coordinating CISA authorizations for incidental take throughout the state. And today I'm going to talk to you about consistency determinations because we use a lot of them lately. They're getting more and more useful, but there are specific and difficult. So I'm going to talk some more about how they work and the best ways to use them. So today I'm just going to go over some of the basics, how we determine consistency, and I'm going to talk about at the end our kind of newer option for consistency determinations for restoration projects as well. So let's start out with what is a consistency determination. All right, the code section is Fish and Game Code section 2080.1, and it basically it's useful for if you have a federal permit, such as a section 7 incidental take statement, or a section 10 incidental take permit. If it authorizes the right things in the right way so that it works with CISA, then you do not need an additional authorization. You don't need an ITP from the CDFW if we can determine that your federal document is consistent with the California Endangered Species Act. So any person who receives one of these documents, so unlike LSA where there are requirements and definitions for an entity, any person who receives one of these documents can request a consistency determination from the department. But the federal permit needs to authorize take of a jointly listed species, meaning both listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act, listed as a state threatened, endangered, or candidate for one of those two. And once you request the authorization for take for these species, once you request a determination that the federal authorization is consistent, the department has 30 days to make a determination whether or not that federal authorization is consistent. If it is consistent with CISA, there's no further CISA authorization that is required. There are also a couple of other codes for experimental populations. Most people aren't going to need to know about these, but if you're doing a project where you would like to either take meaning hunt, pursue, catch, capture, kill, take a species that is already determined to be an experimental population, you can go through this process as well. So I'm just going to let you know about these code sections. But in general, we're not going to talk too much more about those. But if you have questions about those, let me know.
Madeline, just quick interruption.
Go ahead.
We're still on the title slide.
Oh, it is not moving for you. It's moving for me. Yay. Okay. Let's go back. Thank you for letting me know that. And it is not.
If you could just repeat everything in the last 5 minutes, that'd be great.
All right. I'm gonna stop sharing and share again and see
Sure.
if that works. Okay. Let's see. That is weird. Let's share again. I'll have to reopen it. Of course. I closed it and I'm reopening it to see if that also helps. Let's see. Sorry, everyone. Let's present. Right. Let's see. Are we working now? Let's see if I can move. If I switch to the next slide, did that show up for you guys?
I think we have a blank screen.
It says
Oh.
you're sharing. I think there's just a lag. Yeah, it's working.
All right. Can we see the slideshow now?
There's like a Zoom quit unexpectedly in front of your slide.
Awesome.
Do you see that
I don't.
box? Oh my.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I had that a second ago, but it is gone now. But it's still there for you guys?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find your presentation and I can try to share it.
Sure.
I've got it as well.
That is weird. I'm so
Do
sorry.
you mind, Scott, if you have it up, can you just do it? It's okay. Zoom and all these platforms, I think we all in the virtual world know moving from Teams to WebEx to Zoom, they all have their own nuance intricacies, and it's not your fault, Madeline. These things happen.
All right.
Scott, do you mind sharing it since you have it?
Yeah, let's see if I can bring this up.
Is it on my screen? Is it still, the Zoom box is still there? Or are we?
That's what I see.
Okay. Stop sharing then. All right.
Can you see it here?
I can.
Yep.
So
This will
okay.
work for me. All right. We'll make this work. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. This was just our outline. We're going to talk about the basics, how we determine consistency, and then we're going to talk about restoration CDs at the end. All right. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Here is your Fish and Game Code and our definitions slide. This is where we talked about incidental take statements or federal incidental take permits. And you must, in order to be eligible for consistency determination, your federal authorization must authorize take of a jointly listed species, meaning listed under both the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act. Once we receive the request, we have 30 days to make this authorization or to make the determination whether it's consistent or inconsistent. And if it is consistent, there is no further authorization from the department about CISA required. So if there are LSA, lake or stream bed alteration considerations, that may still be required, but for CISA, there's no further authorizations required. All right, next slide, please. These were the Fish and Game Code sections about experimental populations. If you have a project that will be possibly impacting these species, we can get more in depth on those. You can contact us for more questions. But I just want I want people to be aware of these specific code sections, but they're not the bulk of today's discussion. So let's move on to the next slide as well. Okay. So here are important considerations for consistency determination. There are differences in the definitions of take and a couple other definitions within the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act that can make consistency determinations a little bit more difficult because they're not exactly the same. The Federal Endangered Species Act, their definition of take is harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, collect, capture, or to attempt to do any of those. The California definition of take is hunt, pursue, catch, capture, or kill, or to attempt to do any of those. You'll see that the California Endangered Species Act doesn't quite have harm, harass, wound anywhere in there. It's not exactly the same. And so there are some differences in in those authorizations. So for example, if you have a federal permit that authorizes harass of a species, and that's it, it doesn't authorize pursue or hunt or capture anything that we would determine as take under the California Endangered Species Act, that federal authorization can't be used for consistency determination because it has to authorize take. And under the California Endangered Species Act definition of take, harass is not mentioned in there. So we cannot use that document as a consistency determination, but it's also debatable as to whether or not you need a CESA authorization if you're only harassing. So if you are in that specific situation, that is a contact your regional CDFW scientist who would be working with you on permitting to find out if you need any further authorization from the department. All right, next slide, please. So here's a little bit more about the differences between the Federal Endangered Species Act and the California Endangered Species Act that can cause some difficulties and have in the past caused difficulties with consistency determinations. The more you know about these, the easier it will be to understand how consistency determinations can be difficult and what to do to overcome those difficulties. So one of the biggest issues is that the Federal Endangered Species Act requires all impacts to the species to be minimized and mitigated to the maximum extent practicable, whereas California Endangered Species Act says they have to be fully mitigated. All impacts to the species that come from any activity that could cause the taking of the species needs to be fully mitigated. And fully mitigated, we have read it as making it as if the impacts to the species never occurred. So that's how you can fully mitigate something. So that's a higher mitigation standard often. Sometimes they're the same, but we often require a higher mitigation standard. We also require within Fish and Game Code 2081B that funding for implementing those mitigation measures and monitoring must be ensured. And that means it must be ensured to the department, to California Department of Fish and Wildlife, not to the feds, in order for it to be consistent with CESA. And that, of course, also makes finding consistency very difficult. We have managed this by working hand in hand with the applicant and the feds during the drafting of the federal documents to make sure that they write in a requirement that funding needs to be ensured, usually through a security, to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So those are some of the tricky difficulties here, but as we have learned to work ahead in advance, we have made more and more consistency determinations lately, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service have become more open lately to working with us in advance. All right, next slide, please. So here is the general consistency determination process. Once you have that federal permit that in the code, it says incidental take statement or incidental take permit. Once you have those, they need to be submitted to the director's office. That's a requirement of Fish and Game Code. It's difficult sometimes because Fish and Game Code authorizes us to do things, but it can also be very binding to us. So it says the director's office needs to receive them. So the director's office needs to receive the request for determination. So you can either submit it via hard copy through the mail or go in and hand it to the director's office. Or you can submit online through our ePIMS document repository. And you can find links to that on our department website. And included in that submittal, you must have, and these three things are in Fish and Game Code, the notice of the receipt of the incidental take statement or ITP. Generally, that's a little vague, and they don't usually give you something other than your incidental take statement or your incidental take permit that says, here's your incidental take statement. So we have been interpreting that as the request. We need to receive a request from you that says, hey, I have this federal document and I'd like a consistency determination. We also need a copy of that document, of course, and any related documents that can be used for consistency. So for the incidental take statement, that includes the rest of the biological opinion that comes along with that incidental take statement. For an ITP, those usually go hand in hand with a habitat conservation plan. And so we also need to see that habitat conservation plan because that's where the meat of the measures generally are. Consistency determinations also have a fee for most of them. So we require those three things, including the fee. And once those are received, we have 30 days to make that determination. If we just receive the federal permit, but not the fee, then the request has not been considered received. And so those 30 days don't start until we have all of those things. All right, next slide, please. So this is, again, the hard part, the actually determining consistency, because we can only use those federal documents according to Fish and Game Code. So we can't add any conditions, we can't alter any conditions, we can't say this is almost consistent if you would just do this. That has to be in the federal documents. We can request notices such as if the federal document says you will give these reports to the feds, we can request that you also give them to us, but we can't make it a condition of consistency unless it's already in the federal document. And we can accept bank credits as mitigation if they're purchased prior to the issuance of the CD. So we were talking, I was talking before about how mitigation can be very difficult with a consistency determination because we need that security provided to us. You have to ensure funding, which means you have to make certain that there is funding for that mitigation and monitoring. And the way that we have been making certain that there is funding is we have been requiring a security. In the past, we have accepted letters that say we have this funding, but it turns out that those letters don't actually ensure. So there have been times where that mitigation wasn't completed and we had no way to complete it because we didn't have a security. So we do require security, except if you purchase bank credits in advance, then a security isn't required because the mitigation is already completed. So that is one of the ways we've gotten around situations where an agency can't provide a funding insurance, a security, or sometimes smaller groups as well can't provide a security because the security is your pot of money for the mitigation and you have to buy the mitigation. So one of the ways we handle that again is purchasing credits in advance. So you only have to use that one bucket of money. We do return the security once mitigation is completed. So threshold questions. These are if you're looking at, is my federal document possibly eligible for a consistency determination? Things to ask yourself are which species involved? Are they jointly listed species? We only have the authority to authorize take of jointly listed species. We of course can't authorize CISA take of a species that isn't CISA listed. There can be non-CISA listed species on the document as well, such as California red-legged frog. It's federally listed but not state listed. We can that can still be on the document. We just kind of ignore it. We don't have the authority to issue that kind of authorization here. So we just ignore it and look at the jointly listed species in the document. Consistency with what kind of federal approvals? As again, it's just that ITS or that ITP, incidental take statements in conjunction with a biological opinion, or incidental take permits in conjunction with an HCP. Oh, here we are on the next slide, all about federal approvals. So a biological assessment by the action agency, such as Caltrans is doing a biological assessment for the entire project. We can't use the biological assessment itself as a part of that consistency determination unless it is included in the federal, by reference in the federal document. So sometimes the ITS will say the take conferred by this incidental take statement is based on the project occurring as described in the biological opinion and in further detail in the biological assessment dated on this date. If they include that into the incidental take statement, then we can also use that biological assessment. And that's another way we have also been able to include requiring securities, is if it's written into the biological assessment that the agency will provide a security to a department, and then that biological assessment that says that is incorporated by reference into the incidental take statement, then we can use that biological assessment. On its own, if it's not incorporated by reference, we don't have the authority to look at it. We can only look at the incidental take statement or the incidental take permit. Similarly, a NEPA environmental impact statement, while it is a federal document, it is not one of the federal documents we can determine consistency with. We have to determine consistency with ITS or the ITP. So an environmental impact statement on its own or other document pursuant to NEPA isn't something that we can determine consistency with, but it can be incorporated by reference, just like that biological assessment, and then we can look at it. All right, next slide, please. And this is some of the language. This is language that we've worked out with both the Fish and Wildlife Service and NMFS to help make those transitions, to help incorporate the rest of the language. That top one is the one that I was just talking about for incidental take statement. Is the proposed action occurring as described in the accompanying biological opinion, or you can also add biological assessment there. Anything else that is needed to help us determine consistency, anything that's needed that has all that other information about funding or full mitigation in there needs to be incorporated by reference in this statement. We've also worked with NMFS to have similar language for their restoration biological opinions. They have a few programmatic ones throughout the state, and they have included this language in there in order to make it more easy for us to do consistency determinations on them. All right, next slide, please. So this is the meat of the 2081B consistency determination. So 2081B is the Fish and Game Code sections that talk about incidental take. These are for development projects. A lot of what people are doing that is not specifically to benefit species. So in order for us to make a consistency determination, it needs to have all of these things. Some of them we talked about before, adequate funding. Let's look a little bit more into the other requirements. So the take must be incidental to an otherwise lawful activity, of course. Incidental meaning it is happening in spite of, it is not the purpose of the project. It is happening on the side because of the project. The impacts of the authorized take shall be minimized and fully mitigated, and those measures to minimize and fully mitigate must be roughly proportional in extent to the impact of the taking. Maintain the applicant's objectives to the greatest extent possible, and be capable of successful implementation. So if we have multiple options for mitigation, we want the one that it maintains the applicant's objective and is roughly proportional in extent to the impact. Lastly, it has to be capable of working. If we don't think that this is something that's actually possible to do, we can't accept it as mitigation. The applicant shall ensure adequate funding. That's kind of what we were talking about a minute ago. And that adequate funding must be for all of those measures in the paragraph above, and to secure mitigation applications that aren't completed in advance. So if mitigation is completed in advance of impacts, like we talked about before, and purchasing credits is one of those ways to complete mitigation in advance of impacts, purchasing credits in advance. So we do accept that as mitigation. And yes, and in response to one of the questions, in advance of the action is if it is written into the federal document that they must purchase this in advance of the action, then that will fit the requirements that mitigation is ensured. If they don't have that written into the federal document, they can do it before the consistency determination request. And that will be the same as if it was written into the document because it's already done. I hope that answers that question. So, and lastly, the ensuring adequate funding must also be funding for monitoring compliance with and effectiveness of those measures. The last requirement for all incidental take is that no permit can be issued from the department if issuance of that permit would jeopardize the continued existence of the species. We cannot issue an ITP or a consistency determination for the very last, living parts of a species or anything that would cause species to collapse. There's a lot more that goes into a jeopardy determination, but those are kind of some of the first questions to ask. So just FYI, we can't do a CD on anything that would cause jeopardy to a species. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about restoration projects a little bit more, but just FYI, we are now able to do consistency with section 2081A, and that is our science and education and management section. So take for science, education, and management. And so we, in order to determine consistency for those projects, we look at 2081A instead of 2081B. 2081A doesn't include full mitigation, and it doesn't include funding assurance. But we do still need to follow these other requirements in CISA, which is that for those, the take needs to be for science, education, or management purposes. The measures that would be done to benefit the species still need to be roughly proportional in extent to the impacts of the taking. And measures must maintain applicants' objective to the greatest extent possible and will not jeopardize the continued existence of the species. We're going to talk a little bit more about restoration CDs in just a minute. All right, next slide, please. Inconsistency with CISA. So any of those kind of requirements that I talked about before must meet them all, or else it's inconsistent. One of the ways to fight that is, like I said before, early engagement and consultation. When you're working with the feds, bring in CDFW as well, so we can all be at the table, so we can make sure that federal document will work for us as well. And so if we can identify any inconsistency prior to that, we can work together to make changes to the federal project approval. And we do that kind of a bit. Danielle, did you have your hand up?
No, it's the Zoom clap feature. I'm sorry. I was clapping
Yes.
at early and often consult.
Yes. Yeah, working together, bringing us in as early as possible is the best way to get documents that work for everybody and to get a project that works for everybody in advance. Even if you can't make a consistency determination, if you come to the department later and we have to change the project for any reason, then you'll have to go back to the feds. If you bring us in at the same time, we can all work together so that we only have to do it once. So what does happen sometimes is that somebody requests consistency and then finds out that a part of their project isn't going to work, and so we need to change it. So either you can accept that inconsistency determination, or we ask the applicant to withdraw. We, plus the applicant, work with the feds to fix whatever needs to be fixed. Maybe we had one recently where it was just the wrong number of mitigation. They had an addition error. So we had the applicant withdraw, and we fixed it and put it right back in, and got their consistency determination much quicker the second time around. Also, in those situations, we have often waived the consistency determination fee for the second time. If it's just a minor change, it's not something I can promise, but it is something that it often happens. If it's a minor change and we go right back into the process at the same, there's no really additional work that needs to be done on our end, then we often have waived that fee to make it easier to withdraw, fix it, and request again. All right, next slide, please. CEQA, everybody's favorite. Luckily, consistency determinations are ministerial. If all we have to do is check and make sure that it fits with CISA, and it's a yes or no answer. We don't have to negotiate any mitigation ratios or negotiate anything. Therefore, it's just a ministerial action for us. So CEQA is not required for the department. The project still may require CEQA with their lead agency, but it's ministerial for the project. We don't have to look at it. So if there is no other, if there are no other state approvals, including regional or local government approvals, your project may be exempt completely if you go through this pathway. Maybe not, depending on what other approvals are required. But for the department, see, it's ministerial, no CEQA. All right, next slide, please. It does have, CDs do have fees, and they are part, the application fees are part of requesting a consistency determination. If we don't receive that fee, then we haven't received the request. However, and you can find out the fees, we have them online, they update every year. We have them online at this website. You can also just look up CDFW CDs and you will open up our webpage. However, there are no fees for voluntary habitat restoration projects, and it's specifically voluntary, so it can't be habitat restoration projects that are mitigation or a court order for another project. But if it's a completely restoration project that's voluntary, no fees. All right, next slide, please. All right, I just have a couple more slides about restoration CDs, and then we'll finish up and we'll be ready to take a bunch of questions. So the concept of a restoration CD is fairly new. Previously, we had only been looking at 2081B. That's that incidental take section of the Endangered Species Act. And that requires the full mitigation and the funding assurances. And it didn't always work for restoration projects because restoration projects often have grant funding. They can't ensure funding. And the idea of fully mitigating something that is already a beneficial project is not something that was easy to make happen for a consistency determination. So let's move on to the next slide and we'll see how we've kind of reinterpreted. We have looked at how that 2080.1, the section of Fish and Game Code that allows us to make consistency determinations. It doesn't say it must be consistent with 2081B. It says it must be consistent with CISA. So we have started looking at 2081A, which is that memorandum of understanding section, that scientific, educational, management purposes section. And it doesn't require permit fees. It doesn't require full mitigation. It doesn't require financial assurances. There's not a lot within that section that gives us any direction with permitting other than scientific, educational, and management purposes. So we have now been using this section to authorize consistency determinations for restoration projects, for projects that fit. Let's go to the next slide. So what we have been using to determine consistency are these other parts of Fish and Game Code and CISA that give us the rest of our mission statements. And that's conserving and protecting, restoring and enhancing. So if your project is a voluntary restoration project that fits under 2081A, science, education, or management, which management is how we've been working with restoration projects, and fits the rest of our requirements elsewhere in Fish and Game Code that we have to follow, such as using ecosystem-based management informed by credible science, all of these things, then we have been using these as our measures for determining consistency for those 2081A projects. All right, next slide, please. And the other big thing in restoration right now is that there are a lot of programmatic biological opinions. By a lot, I mean like 5, through both NIMS and the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service one is statewide, and NIMS has a few different area ones. And those are where much of the restoration is using for the restoration community is using for their federal approvals. So it's difficult for us to do consistency on programmatic biological opinions because we need to do it on a project by project basis. So how we have started doing that, next slide, please. We have started doing that by using the individual project approval documents and doing consistency determinations on the individual project, not the entire programmatic biological opinion. Next slide, please. And so that, like I was saying here, there is no way for us to do a consistency determination on the entire programmatic document, but we can do consistency determinations on the individual project that is appended to that programmatic document using the BO, the programmatic BO, plus the application given to the feds to append that document. So any project specific approvals. And that still must satisfy the requirements of CISA, and using those project specific approvals is how we get to that consistency determination. And I think that is about the end. So we have a lot of new restoration CDs that are going through this pathway. So it is a possibility, and we can work with you and work with the feds. We can go ahead to the next slide. So this is how you can contact me. My manager is Margaret Manter, my supervisor. The next one down, that's me, Madeline Wieland. And we also have an email for our CISA and general inbox. So if you have general questions for my entire team, you could just use that CISA inbox, and we can help either point you to the appropriate regional staff or answer your questions. So I am ready to take lots of questions. I know there's a lot to do with consistency determination, so I'm going to stop. Oh, I'm not scared.
So we have a couple questions in the Q&A so far. The first question, thank you, by the way, Madeline, that was very enlightening. Will CDFW accept certificates of insurance from a public agency as a form of financial security?
Not generally. We have in certain situations worked with agencies and staff to other applicants, such as local assistance applicants, with them to come up with possible ways. We have worked with Caltrans to create an entire agreement that includes back and forth negotiations in case they failed. It's called our master funding agreement. And we have had situations where we have accepted contracts from, maybe contracts isn't the right word, but we have so in state agencies often have said that they can't provide security, such as Caltrans or DWR. Caltrans has had some situations where they have contracted with their contractors for the contractor to provide us a security. And then Caltrans has built that into their EAs. We've also accepted bonds. I'm not sure specifically about certificates of insurance because it's not something I have seen. So I don't know, but it is not something we've done before as far as I know. That is something we could possibly work with our Office of General Counsel, our attorneys, to determine if that would qualify as insuring funding. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for that one. It's not one that I've seen before, so probably not, but that's not a straight out no.
Yeah, I know the funding assurance can be an issue for some of our local public agencies, and the master funding agreement isn't something that they have access to. It's a Caltrans capital project agreement only. So that is definitely, I know, one of the biggest issues that we have going on. So maybe that's a good question, we'll probably to follow up on too.
Yeah, that's a great question to follow up on.
All right, we have another question in the Q&A. In the past, We had an issue with a CISA fully protected fish.
Mhm.
Take was not authorized, period. We had to go to the legislature to pass a law to allow us to replace a bridge.
Mhm.
Has this been addressed, or do we still need an act of Congress to replace a small bridge on a rural dirt road?
So yes and no. This is something that has plagued all of us, including department staff as well. So like I said before, legislation gives us authority, but also binds us. And the fully protected species statutes are from a long time ago, and at some point in time, there is no take mechanism through those statutes. We had no way to authorize take. So in order for a project that could affect a fully protected species to go through, they did actually need to go through the legislature. Recently, and we have tried to have that amended multiple times. It's often been blocked by many. We have tried to amend it, many other people have tried to amend it. This year, there has finally been some movement. Senate Bill 147 introduced a section of Fish and Game Code, and this is passed and has already started, introduced a section of Fish and Game Code that authorizes department incidental take permits for fully protected species, but only for a very limited set of infrastructure projects, wind and solar projects, transportation projects, yes, including bridge projects that do not increase the capacity for vehicles on the road. They don't want and the legislature drafted this bill. They didn't want every single road widening project to be able to do this, but infrastructure projects that replace bridges, that maintain current roads with it, but don't widen, are eligible, generally eligible. Every project we're taking on a case-by-case basis and analyzing to make sure that they fit. So there is that ability now to do. We are just starting it. It just passed in July, and we are just figuring out the process of how to do this. But you can work with your regional, whatever your CDFW staff in the project area is. They are aware of this new thing, and they're working with, I'm in headquarters, they're working with headquarters and our Office of General Counsel to look at every project and see if it is capable and eligible to use that new code provision. All right. Let's see, we have another question.
Yeah, that's good to know. So sounds like this issue has been addressed, and you're working on understanding the details of the language. But that sounds like a great
Yes,
step forward.
a great step it's only for certain projects, like I said, but
Right.
it's
So like
definitely
I think the caveat there is like, this rural bridge, was it in kind, or was they trying to expand the capacity of, that would be the caveat that would kick it out this now with the current understanding.
Yes, exactly.
All right, next question. You mentioned that if the ITS BO in the BO contains certain language, CDFW can issue consistency determination. But I have been told in the past by U.S. Fish and Wildlife staff that BO should only discuss federally listed species. Any thoughts on how to capture federal and state species in the BA leading to the BO? Will U.S. Fish and Wildlife make exceptions and add state listed species if they know the local agency is seeking a consistency determination?
So no. So consistency determinations are only for jointly listed species. So a species that is both federally listed and state listed. The feds don't have any authority to provide authorization for a species that is state listed but not federally listed. So consistency determination is only an option if you're looking for jointly listed species. Again, if there are other federal listed species in there that aren't state listed, we just don't look at them. We only look at the ones that are jointly listed, but they will not include anything that is just state listed. If you just have the state listed species, such as Mojave ground squirrel or San Joaquin antelope squirrel, Those are state listed, but not federally listed. They will not be in any federal documents. The feds don't have any authorization to add them in there. You'll need to go through the ITP process, or if it's a restoration project, you can go through MOUs, or we have a restoration management permit. You can reach out to our Cutting the Green Tape program if you are interested in learning more about restoration management permits. But no, on the Fed side, if it's just state listed and not also federally listed, they can't add it in there. They don't have the authority.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so when you're, for your local assistance projects that are federally funded, Caltrans district staff are going to be leading that Section 7 consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or with NIMS. So, I just want to really circle back to what Madeline said about early and often consultation. So if you think your project, if you have duly listed species at your project location and you think you're going to want to pursue a consistency determination, let your district environmental staff that's undertaking that Section 7 consultation, let them know as soon as you can so that they can start working with you to include CDFW in the conversation. Because this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have these conversations here for the local public agencies and your partners, is to understand that it is a little more complicated for us because we don't have that jurisdiction here at Caltrans. We can't just say, oh, they're going to get a consistency determination, we're going to add CDFW in. We need you guys to basically help us include them. So it's up to you to ask your Caltrans environmental district staff to help initiate, with them so that we can all talk to each other. In a perfect world, it wouldn't be so complicated, but that's the world we're living in. So if you want a consistency determination, make sure to let your, environmental district staff know. There's also language that we have, that we know of that we can help ask U.S. Fish and Wildlife to include in their BO that makes it more palatable for CDFW to be able to approve. So there's things we have and we know in-house that can also help you guys. And, if you ever have any questions or if you get in any trouble, you can also ask your, your environmental senior at their Caltrans district, for consultation. We can offer advice. We can't direct you, but we can also help. If you need help contacting them or connecting with CDFW, we can help facilitate that if you ask us. So don't be afraid to ask for help from, when you're working on your PES and you're getting your project through. Any questions you have, your environmental district staff at Caltrans is there to also help make these connections if you need help. I just want to be really clear, we don't have any jurisdiction, we don't lead anything, but we're here to help you if needed.
I added a link into the chat that is a link to our department regions. So it's how it's broken up, but also if you click on each region, it'll give you contact information to how to start a conversation with each one of those regions where your project is, to get an environmental scientist assigned to your project to look and help to be part of that conversation with you. You may also, because this is local assistance, I'm not exactly sure, you may also be working with a Caltrans CDFW liaison. But
no, sorry.
Okay, I was like, I'm not sure how local assistance, which way it works.
No, that's that's not, I wish that's how it was. This is part of the reason why we have this CDFW partnership. So local assistance projects don't use the CDFW liaisons. Okay. That is part of the reason why the partnership has been developed, to help make that connection, to help get our local public agency projects on your guys' radar, and then help bring information directly from you to them. Thank you.
Definitely. Okay, so then you can use that link to find contacts for the region where your project will be. All right. Any other questions about consistency determinations or CISA permitting in general?
I don't see any more so far, but we can definitely last call for consistency determination questions. We'll see if there's any. I don't see anything in the chat either. Looks like we.
Sounds great. I answered everything.
Good job.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for letting us present. And contact us if you have questions. You can reach my team at CISA@wildlife.ca.gov.
Yes, and my name is Danielle Elledge again. I'm a resource agency coordinator for the Division of Local Assistance, Office of Environmental Compliance and Outreach. You can also reach me at danielle.elledge@dot.ca.gov.